How do you know the data isn't just, structurally doomed from the very first keystroke?
Right. I mean, that is the million-dollar question.
Yeah, it really is. Think about that, especially if you are holding a heavily funded research paper right now. Because in the social sciences, unlike physics or chemistry, the atoms we are measuring, people, societies, cultural shifts, they have this really nasty habit of changing their minds.
Yeah, they don't sit still for the microscope.
Exactly. We're dealing with free will, chaotic environments, and volatile economic systems. So whether you're a graduate student defending a thesis or a university professor guiding the next wave of researchers, or even like a high-ranking government official.
Oh, especially government officials. They're making massive decisions based on this stuff.
Right. Preparing to allocate billions of dollars based on some demographic trend. So how do you actually verify that the methodology you're relying on is an architectural fortress of knowledge rather than, well, a fragile illusion?
It's the ultimate crisis of credibility in modern research.
So today, we are undertaking this massive, expansive journey into the methodological DNA of the social sciences. We're exploring what's called the language of research, or the framework of inquiry.
And just to clarify, we are not talking about, academic jargon used to sound intimidating at a symposium.
Right. No, we're exploring a really sober, meticulous, and ruthlessly disciplined hierarchy of scientific knowledge.
Because in the social sciences, linguistic precision isn't just like an elegant stylistic choice. It is the absolute standard for the credibility of your methodology.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a vast chasm between a researcher making some idiosyncratic, haphazard observation about a community and a researcher building systematic, nomothetic knowledge. Knowledge that can actually diagnose an issue and, predict future outcomes.
Nomothetic, that's a great word. And to guide us through this really intricate architecture, we are relying on the seminal expertise of Professor Dr. Khaled Abdulqader Mansour TUMI.
Yes, absolutely. His work is foundational here.
For those of you who aren't familiar, he is the Senior Advisor of Strategic Studies and Security Sciences, both regionally and internationally. He's also the founder of the Integrated Educational Model.
What's so striking about his framework is the sheer structural discipline it brings to the absolute chaos of social observation.
He provides this ladder of complexity, right, that takes a researcher from the most isolated, chaotic data point all the way up to complex predictive systems.
It is a remarkable epistemological roadmap. I mean, the methodology established by Prof. Dr. Khaled TUMI elevates linguistic precision to the literal bedrock of inquiry.
It's like a rescue mission for researchers.
That's a good way to put it. He provides a mechanism to rescue researchers and, by extension, the policymakers who rely on their work from the noise of raw data. He guides them with these highly specific, logically necessary steps toward organized systems of knowledge.
But to understand the system, we have to start at the absolute bottom of that ladder. And the framework establishes a foundational axiom that, frankly, forces you to reevaluate how you look at data.
Right. It's a wake-up call.
The axiom is this, and I love this. In the social sciences, everything is a variable. Everything.
It's a sobering statement. It really forces the researcher to confront the fundamental reality of the social world.
Because it doesn't stop moving.
Exactly. The variable is the irreducible atomic unit of all research. It's the component that absolutely refuses to stay still.
Wow.
Before you can even attempt to understand a complex human system, you must identify the individual parts of that system that fluctuate.
But if everything is a variable, aren't we just chasing our own tails?
How do you mean?
Well, if the atomic unit itself won't stay still, how can we possibly build a rigid, reliable construct out of it? I mean, if human behavior is that messy, trying to define it rigidly at the atomic level feels like trying to nail jelly to a wall.
I hear that a lot, but fluidity isn't the enemy of rigor. Actually, ignoring the fluidity is the enemy.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it is precisely because human systems are messy that the methodology must be rigorous. A variable isn't meant to be like a static box that traps human nature.
Okay.
It's a highly calibrated instrument designed to capture and measure change. If you don't define the exact parameters of how a specific element changes, if you don't define this atomic unit accurately, you lose construct validity before you've even written your literature review.
So the framework breaks this down into 3 distinct dimensions that a researcher must define for every single variable. And those are amount, direction, and significance.
Right. The 3 pillars of the variable.
The first 2 seem relatively straightforward mathematically. I mean, amount is just the quantitative magnitude, right? Like how much of The element is present, or its frequency.
Yes, exactly. So if your variable is, say, household income, the amount is the specific monetary value or the numerical bracket.
Or the days in a classroom.
Right. If it's classroom attendance, it's the exact number of days present. It requires very strict empirical indicators.
And direction would be the trend, or like the vector. Is that income going up or down over a specific 5-year period? Is it a positive or negative trajectory?
Correct. And here is where most novice researchers, and honestly even some seasoned ones, totally fail. They define the amount and the direction, and they just assume they've captured the variable.
They stop there.
They stop there. And they've entirely neglected the third dimension, which the framework identifies as significance, or in the Arabic methodological terms, datala.
Datala. Okay, this is the one I really want to dissect. Because the text defines significance as the qualitative weight, the semantic meaning, or the epistemic value of the component within your specific research context.
That's right.
But how do you actually measure that? Amount and direction are numbers. Significance sounds dangerously subjective to me. I mean, how do you rigorously define the semantic meaning of a variable without just injecting your own cultural bias?
See, that is the critical friction point of social science research. Significance requires the researcher to define the impact weight of that variable in its unique environment.
The impact weight.
Yes. Let's take our income example. Suppose the amount is an increase of $500 a month.
Okay, $500.
And the direction is a positive upward trend over 1 year.
Got it. Up $500.
Now, in a highly affluent neighborhood, the significance, the actual societal impact of that $500 increase might be practically negligible.
Right. I mean, it doesn't really change anything for them.
Exactly. It doesn't change purchasing behavior, it doesn't alter educational access, and it certainly doesn't affect healthcare outcomes. The epistemic value of that variable in that context is very low.
Okay, but if you take that exact same amount and direction, a $500 upward trend, and apply it to a community living below the poverty line,
the significance just explodes.
Yeah.
In that context, that $500 alters nutritional intake. It mitigates housing instability. It fundamentally changes the psychological stress levels of the household.
Wow.
The numbers, the amount and direction are identical in both scenarios, but the significance is radically different.
So if a researcher just reports the numbers and fails to define the significance,
They are providing data without context, which in social science is effectively useless.
man. So if I'm a government official reading a massive policy report on a new housing subsidy, and the researchers haven't explicitly defined the significance of the variables in the target communities, I should just reject the report.
You should view it with extreme skepticism, yes, because this leads to what the methodology warns against: cascading failure.
Cascading failure.
Yes. Identifying and defining this foundational variable is the most critical strategic decision in the entire research process.
Right, because if you get it wrong,
If a researcher imprecisely defines the variable, if they miss the significance, the flaw doesn't just sit there in the methodology section. It ripples upward.
it infects everything else.
Exactly. It renders the subsequent constructs unstable, it makes the larger concepts completely invalid, and it leaves the final theoretical recommendations logically hollow.
You're essentially building a fortress on sand.
Worse, you are building a highly sophisticated, expensive machine with parts that don't actually fit together, but you don't realize it until you turn the machine on and it shatters.
That is a terrifying metaphor.
It happens all the time. This is why Professor Dr. Khaled TUMI's framework demands such disciplined adherence at the atomic level. You literally cannot proceed to systemic analysis until the variables are flawlessly operationalized.
Okay, so let's talk about that progression. Because atoms don't just float around in a vacuum forever, right? They collide, they interact.
They absolutely do.
And this conceptual necessity, the fact that variables inevitably act upon one another, it forces us to climb to the next level of the framework. We are leaping from isolation into relationship, the realm of microstructures.
This is a really profound analytical threshold. It's the exact moment the researcher transitions from being a passive observer of isolated facts into an active architect of relational logic.
We're moving up.
Yes, we move up from the single variable to confront the critical distinction between a construct and a concept.
Okay, this distinction is where I think a lot of academic papers start to unravel. Because in general conversation, people use construct and concept as if they're the exact same word.
Oh, all the time.
But in this methodological architecture, blurring those two terms is a fatal error, isn't it?
It is a disastrous error. They are qualitatively, structurally, and functionally different. Let's begin with the construct.
Okay.
The framework defines a construct as a surgical, highly focused relation between exactly two variables in a limited specific case.
Exactly two.
Exactly two. It is strictly a dyadic interaction.
So if I am looking at how property taxes affect standardized test scores in one specific school district in the year 2024, property taxes is variable A, test scores is variable B, one district, one time frame. That is a construct.
Exactly. It is a deliberate, highly controlled mental building created by the researcher. You're isolating the noise of the rest of the world to see if a change in variable A reliably corresponds to a change in variable B in this very narrow environment.
Right.
It is the foundation of relational observation.
But a construct is inherently limited, right? I mean, I can't take the findings from that one single school district and go write national policy on it.
No, absolutely not.
If I do, I'm committing statistical malpractice, which naturally necessitates the next evolutionary step in the methodology. The
Concept, precisely. If a construct is a tight dyadic focus, a concept is a massive strategic expansion. The framework dictates that a concept involves more than two variables, often referred to as the rule of three or more, and crucially, it is applied across multiple diverse cases.
Okay, let me see if I can translate this into a scenario. If the construct is like setting up a single camera to watch two people interact in a closed room,
Okay, I like that.
the concept is like wiring the entire building with cameras, watching hundreds of people interact, and observing how the temperature of the room, the time of day, and the music playing all affect the way those people speak to each other.
That captures the structural leap perfectly. Yes. The concept synthesizes isolated observations into thematic patterns. It weaves a larger group of variables together to account for the incredible complexity of social reality.
Let's stick with the education example to really ground this, because I think it helps. How does a researcher transition their work from that narrow construct into a mature concept?
Okay, you start with your construct. Variable A is property taxes, and variable B is test scores in District X.
Right.
To expand this into a concept, you must introduce new variables to test the resilience of that relationship. You add variable C, which might be parental education levels. You add variable D, local unemployment rates, and variable E, access to broadband internet.
Wow, okay. That's a lot more data.
It is. And you don't just look at District X anymore. You look at urban districts, rural districts, affluent districts, and impoverished districts across an entire decade.
And suddenly, you aren't just studying taxes and test scores. You have elevated the research to the concept of, like, systemic educational inequity.
Exactly. The concept is the moment research achieves true maturity. It aggressively mitigates the risk of overgeneralization.
Because you're seeing the bigger picture.
Right. If you only look at your construct, you might conclude that raising taxes automatically raises test scores. But when you expand to a concept, you might discover that raising taxes only raises test scores if the local unemployment rate is below a certain threshold and broadband access is universal.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
The concept accounts for the noise and the confounding factors that define real-world social environments.
You know, if you are a graduate student sitting in front of a defense committee, understanding this specific linguistic boundary seems like a total superpower.
Oh, it fundamentally changes the dynamic of a thesis defense.
Huh?
A committee's primary job is to find the holes in your logic, and the easiest target is always overclaiming.
Oh, sure.
If a student walks in and says, "My research proves that X causes Y," based solely on a construct, the committee will absolutely tear them apart for ignoring confounding variables.
But if they control the terminology?
If the student explicitly maps their methodology and says, "My initial investigation observed this specific construct, the dyadic relationship between these two variables in this limited case. But to validate this, I structurally expanded the research into a concept by integrating these three additional variables across these four diverse demographics."
Man, they are showing their work. They are proving they understand the limits of a narrow snapshot, and they possess the strategic integrity to test it across a broader landscape.
They signal immense intellectual maturity. They are demonstrating how to build robust intellectual capital without falling into the trap of conceptual slippage.
Conceptual slippage. That's such a great term. But even a concept has its limitations, doesn't it?
It does.
I mean, the concept gives me a cluster of interacting variables across multiple cases. It shows me a pattern. But if I'm trying to understand an entire societal shift, say, the total impact of artificial intelligence on the global workforce, a cluster of variables isn't enough.
No, it's not.
I still can't see the whole board. I don't know the boundaries of the phenomena, which forces us to climb to the next rung of the methodology, systemic synthesis. the realm of model frameworks versus theories.
This is where we reach macrostructural integration. As your conceptual clusters grow in complexity, encompassing dozens of variables across vast populations, the human mind just cannot process them as isolated patterns anymore.
Right, it's too much data.
Way too much. The researcher requires a massive organizational mechanism to define the sheer scope of the investigation.
And here we hit another massive linguistic landmine: model framework and theory. People use them interchangeably, even in peer-reviewed academic papers.
It's a huge pet peeve of mine.
I bet. But the methodology strictly delineates them. So what is the fundamental qualitative difference between building a model framework and developing a theory?
The most precise way to differentiate them is through their primary function, geography versus mechanics.
Geography versus mechanics.
Okay, let's start with geography. A model framework is the conceptual map. It is a broad, expansive set of variables and concepts organized systematically to cover a wide range of cases.
So it's about layout.
Yes.
Yeah.
Its primary function is to define the boundaries, the structural perimeter, and the taxonomy of the research. It shows us where the components are located relative to one another within a system.
So if we look at the AI example, an AI workforce impact model wouldn't necessarily tell me exactly who is going to lose their job tomorrow.
No, it wouldn't.
But it would map out all the critical factors, like the rate of algorithmic processing speed, global supply chain dependencies, regional labor laws, and corporate investment in retraining. It draws the perimeter of the battlefield.
Precisely. It architects a systemic map. It organizes the chaos into a structured visualization. You can see how the variables are grouped. But a theory is fundamentally different.
Okay, here's the mechanic.
Right. A theory is the engine. It is the complex, dense network of causal relations. A theory is designed to explain exactly why those components interact the way they do and how they will behave in the vast majority of future cases.
So the model framework tells me what is there and where it is. The theory tells me why it moves and how it works.
Yes. A model describes the structural arrangement. A theory possesses generative and predictive power. It explains the underlying mechanics of the terrain.
Wow.
A robust theory weaves together various constructs and concepts into a comprehensive causal web that can actually predict outcomes in scenarios the researcher hasn't even explicitly observed yet.
Okay, I want to look at this from the perspective of our listeners who are high-ranking government officials.
Okay, let's do that.
If I'm a policymaker and my desk is covered in reports, my ultimate mandate is intervention. Right. I need to know what happens if I pull this legislative lever over here.
Right. You need actionable intelligence.
Exactly. I need to know the why and the how, not just the what's. So from a policy standpoint, is a model basically useless to me compared to a theory? Like, should governments only fund and rely on theoretical research?
That is a brilliant, really pragmatic question, and it strikes at the heart of applied social science. The answer is that a model is absolutely not useless. In fact, it is the mandatory prerequisite scaffolding.
Yeah.
You cannot build a functional engine without first drawing the blueprint of the chassis.
But if it doesn't have predictive power, how does it help a policymaker?
Because policymakers are frequently forced to navigate completely uncharted territory. Let's look at a sudden, unprecedented crisis, say a novel global pandemic, or the overnight collapse of a major financial sector.
Oh, right. Black swan events.
Exactly. In the immediate aftermath of those events, there are no existing theories that can accurately predict the fallout because the variables are entirely new.
That makes sense. We haven't had time to build an engine yet.
If you demand a theory on day one, you will get dangerous speculation. What you urgently need in that moment is a model framework.
You need researchers to map the relevant variables so you understand the structural perimeter of the crisis.
Exactly. The model identifies all the moving parts. It tells the government, look, these are the 20 demographic, economic, and medical variables that are currently in play, and here is how they are grouped.
It prevents policymakers from being blindsided by factors they didn't even know existed.
You have to know where all the pieces are on the board before you can predict the opponent's next move.
But when it comes time to implement long-term structural policy, like when you want to predict how a specific tax incentive will impact wealth distribution over a 20-year horizon, then you must deploy a theory.
Yes, you need that predictive engine to understand the causal mechanisms over time.
Okay, let me summarize this progression because the logic is just staggering when you see it all laid out. You start with the variable, capturing the atomic unit of change.
Right.
You isolate two of them to build a dyadic construct.
Yeah.
You expand that with multiple variables across multiple cases to build a concept.
Correct.
You organize those concepts into a vast structural map. which is the model framework.
The map.
And finally, you connect the causal mechanisms to build a theory, an engine that can predict human behavior in the vast majority of cases.
That is the architectural blueprint of rigorous inquiry.
But notice you said the vast majority of cases. Which brings us to the final, honestly most controversial rung on the ladder, the absolute apex of scientific abstraction, the scientific law.
Ah, yes, the scientific law.
In the hard sciences, this is the holy grail. The law of gravity, the laws of thermodynamics, a single absolute standard that applies to 100% of cases, without exception, regardless of time or place.
Right.
But the methodology established by Professor Dr. Khaled Abdulqader Mansour TUMI introduces a stark, defining reality here. It is a massive paradigm shift for anyone trained in traditional empirical science.
It is the most sobering truth in the entire framework. In the social sciences, scientific laws are rare, to the point of being almost non-existent.
Non-existent.
The Arabic term used in his framework is madum, which carries the weight of something that is structurally absent or non-existent.
Madum. Structurally absent. Yeah. This is a massive blow to the ego of the social sciences. I mean, we spend millions in grant money and decades of research trying to find the ultimate law of economics or the universal law of human behavior.
We want that absolute certainty.
You want our data to look as clean and absolute as physics? But the framework is saying it's a mirage. Why? Why can't we reach that 100% certainty?
Because to understand the apex, you must remember the bedrock. It circles entirely back to the primary axiom we discussed at the very beginning.
In the social sciences, everything is a variable.
Precisely, because the base unit of human behavior is inherently fluid, unstable, and context-dependent. Achieving a universal law that demands a fixed, single standard is logically and structurally impossible.
You can't build a static house out of moving bricks.
You cannot build a completely static, unyielding structure out of materials that are constantly vibrating and changing shape. Professor Dr. Khaled TUMI outlines 3 insurmountable barriers that prevent the formation of absolute laws in social science.
Okay, let's dissect these barriers because this fundamentally changes how we evaluate research. What is the first barrier?
Temporal instability. Human behavior and social structures evolve over time.
Time changes everything.
Exactly. A social rule regarding communication patterns or economic exchange discovered in the 1950s might be completely obsolete today. Society is in a state of constant, accelerating flux. A law requires timelessness, but human society is bound by the era in which it exists.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, the way we consume information, the way we structure our families, it all shifts from generation to generation. What is the second barrier?
Context dependency. Social structures are not universal. They're deeply shaped by geography, culture, religion, and history.
Right, the environment matters.
You cannot take a social dynamic observed in an isolated rural village in the mountains and apply it with 100% certainty to a hyper-dense, modern, multicultural metropolis. A law demands universal application, but human behavior is inextricably linked to its local environment.
So time and place constantly break the rules. But the third barrier, this is the one that really gets into the philosophical deep end for me. What is the third barrier to a scientific law in the social sciences?
The volatility of human agency, the undeniable reality of free will.
I really want to spend some time here because this is an absolute aha moment. We spend so much time looking for these rigid laws of human nature to validate our methodologies. But if you think about it structurally, demanding a law actually strips away human free will.
This is the profound philosophical and epistemological implication of the framework. A scientific law demands a state of absolutism. It states that if X happens, Y must happen 100% of the time with zero deviation.
But if we say humans act a certain way 100% of the time under certain conditions, we are fundamentally arguing that they have no choice. We are reducing human beings to biological algorithms.
Or falling rocks.
Exactly. If you successfully define a true scientific law of human behavior, you have just proven determinism. You have proven that people are merely reacting mechanically to stimuli without any internal agency.
Wow.
But because the underlying components of our study people possess consciousness, cognition, and the power of choice, they can always choose to defy the expected pattern. A person can choose to act against their own economic self-interest out of love or spite or religious conviction.
A falling apple can't choose to defy gravity because it's angry at the tree.
Precisely. Because human agency introduces permanent volatility, our findings in the social sciences must remain probabilistic rather than deterministic. We deal in likelihoods, trends, and vast majorities, not absolute certainties.
Okay, but does that mean a theory is just a failed law? Is social science just a lesser version of hard science because we can't achieve that absolutism? Not at all, and this is a massive, empowering reframing of the narrative for researchers. A theory is not a consolation prize.
Okay. Yeah.
In a world defined by chaotic change, cultural shifts, and the unpredictable nature of free will, developing a robust theory that operates on high-level probability, an engine that explains the mechanics of the vast majority of cases accurately, is the absolute pinnacle of intellectual achievement.
It is the true gold standard of our field.
It is. A deeply calibrated theory respects the inherent variability and agency of human systems while still providing massive predictive power. It is a far more sophisticated achievement than finding a simple mechanical law because it requires the researcher to navigate the chaos of human consciousness.
That is incredibly empowering. You don't have to chase a mirage of absolute certainty. You just have to build a phenomenal, rigorous engine. Let's synthesize this entire journey. I want to build a rapid-fire mental checklist for the listener.
I love checklists. Let's do it.
Because if you are a graduate student finalizing your methodology, or a professor reviewing a submission, or a government official auditing a policy paper, this is your ultimate diagnostic tool for structural integrity. Let's walk back down the ladder.
A structural audit based on the framework. I'm ready.
The one, the variable.
Has the researcher isolated the atomic unit of change? Have they rigorously and explicitly defined its amount, its direction, and crucially, its significance, its data law within the specific cultural context? If not, the foundation is flawed.
Level 2, the construct.
Has the researcher surgically mapped the dyadic interaction? Are they explicitly looking at exactly two variables in a limited, tightly controlled case to establish a baseline relationship?
Level 3, the concept.
Has the researcher mitigated the risk of overgeneralization? Have they applied the rule of three, structurally expanding their observation to include more than two variables across multiple, diverse cases to account for real-world noise?
Level 4,
Yeah.
the model framework.
Has the researcher built a comprehensive structural map? Does the research clearly define the boundaries and the geography of the system, showing where all the conceptual clusters live in relation to one another?
And finally, level 5, the theory.
Has the researcher built the engine? Have they established a complex, interconnected network of causal relations that possesses generative and predictive power? Does it explain the why and how for the vast majority of cases, acknowledging the probabilistic nature of human agency?
If a researcher masters this exact sequence, if they strictly adhere to this linguistic and structural hierarchy, how does it physically change the value of what they produce?
It fundamentally immunizes their work against conceptual slippage and methodological collapse.
It immunizes it.
Yes. When a university thesis is built on this framework, a review committee cannot dismantle it by pointing out logical inconsistencies or overgeneralizations, because every single tier is explicitly supported by the rigorous parameters of the tier below it. The student has already anticipated the friction points.
And for the government official reading the white paper,
it means the policy recommendations are grounded in systematic reality, not isolated anecdotes or theoretical overreach. It provides the official with actionable, predictive insights that acknowledge human complexity rather than ignoring it. It tells the policymaker exactly what level of certainty they are operating with.
it truly is a masterclass in structural discipline.
Yeah.
Navigating the sheer volume of data we have access to today is overwhelming. And none of this clarity would be possible without the profound methodological vision of Professor Dr. Khaled Abdulqader Mansour TUMI. We really have to take a moment to reflect on the impact of this kind of rigorous epistemological design.
The scholarly reservoir he provides in this material is distinct and vital. The social sciences are frequently plagued by methodological looseness, and Professor Dr. Khaled TUMI has spent decades combating that by enriching research with his sober intellect and field-based expertise.
Yeah, his impact is huge.
As an academic transformation expert, his regional and international scientific standing is a direct testament to this rigor. He demands that social science be as disciplined in its language as it is in its statistics.
And I think it is important to note the global nature of this intellectual capital. He continues his profound scholarly contribution from the heart of the ancient city of Tripoli in the state of Libya. It is a powerful reminder that sound knowledge, rigorous methodology, and enlightened academic thought transcend any physical borders. This framework is a gift to anyone anywhere, who earnestly seeks the truth through research.
It is a framework that isn't just meant to be read and cited. It is meant to be actively lived and relentlessly applied by serious researchers across all disciplines of the social sciences.
So, to you, the listener, whether you are the learner taking your first steps into research, the seasoned professor guiding the next generation, or the official making decisions that will impact millions of lives, the next you sit down to read a study or write one yourself, you no longer have to guess about its structural integrity.
You really don't.
You have the architectural blueprint. You can immediately spot if a study is trying to claim the massive predictive power of a theory while it is only standing on the shaky, isolated legs of an ill-defined construct. You have a language of research to demand evidence at every single rung of the ladder.
You are no longer just a consumer of data. You are an auditor of its fundamental credibility.
But before we go, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. We spent a lot of time discussing how the social sciences can't have absolute laws because human society is constantly evolving. Temporal instability, context dependency.
Right.
But think about the world right this very second. Human society is accelerating in complexity due to technological disruption, AI, global interconnectivity, instantaneous communication at a rate we have never witnessed in human history. The variables are changing faster than ever before.
They absolutely are.
So if everything in the social sciences is a variable, and the speed of that change is becoming exponential, will the lifespan of our greatest social theories begin to shrink?
Oh, that's a fascinating question.
Right. Are we entering a new era of research where our engines of explanation can't be relied upon for a century or even a decade? Will the researchers of tomorrow have to rebuild their theories every few years just to keep up with the chaotic evolution of human agency?
That is the existential question the next generation of social scientists will have to answer, and they will need a flawless methodology to do it.
Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this underlying expectation of just pure binary precision.
Right, like an absolute certainty.
Exactly. You fall, you break your arm, the doctor puts you in an X-ray machine, and a few minutes later, boom, there's a glowing screen showing a jagged white line.
Broken or not broken.
Right. The doctor just points to it. It is a clean, visual, undeniable fact. And honestly, it's incredibly comforting because the problem is visible. It is easily categorized.
Oh, absolutely. It's safe.
But the moment you step out of that clinic and into the world of human behavior, well, it's a whole different story. It's sociology, economics, political science, or neurodevelopment.
Yeah, suddenly that X-ray machine is utterly useless.
Completely useless. You are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. I mean, you are dealing with the invisible shifting sands of human society.
Yeah, shifting sands is a great way to put it.
And this is precisely where the vast majority of researchers or policymakers and analysts get completely lost.
Because they want that X-ray machine, right?
Exactly. They try to take the rigid, highly visible tools of the hard sciences and force them onto the chaos of human interaction.
And I imagine that doesn't go well.
No, the result is almost always a theoretical structure that just collapses under its own weight.
And the stakes here, for the listener, the stakes are not just a bad grade on a college paper.
Oh, no, not at all.
We are talking about massive government policies, multi-billion-dollar corporate initiatives, and sweeping sociological studies that dictate how we run our societies.
Right. All hanging on whether the data is actually made of solid brick or if it is just, made of straw.
Which is why the framework we are unpacking today is so vital. We are diving into a meticulously engineered ladder of complexity.
Yes, an architectural blueprint for scientific knowledge in the social sciences.
It takes those muddy waters and builds a structurally sound bridge right over them.
It really does.
So if you are listening right now, whether you are a graduate student agonizing over the methodology chapter of your thesis, or a university professor evaluating doctoral candidates, or even a high-ranking government official looking at massive data sets to make a policy decision that will affect millions of lives.
Which happens every single day.
Right. Mastering this specific framework is your ultimate shortcut to methodological credibility. It is the definitive guide to knowing if you are doing actual science or just well, writing down very expensive opinions.
That is exactly what it is. And this profound methodological vision comes to us from the sober and meticulous scholarly work of Professor Dr. Khaled Abdulqader Mansour TUMI.
Yes.
What we have in front of us is not just a collection of academic definitions. I mean, it is a highly precise roadmap.
A roadmap that moves from the most basic granular observation all the way up to high-level theoretical abstraction.
Exactly. It's a complete journey.
I really want to emphasize that point, because when you look at the language of scientific research, it is so easy to fall into the trap of thinking it is just a glossary of terms to memorize, like flashcards.
Right, just jargon. But it's not.
No, Dr. TUMI lays it out as a journey, an actual physical climb up a ladder of complexity.
Step by step.
Step by step. We're going to start at the absolute ground floor today, looking at the atomic level of data, and we are going to ascend to the very ceiling of what is scientifically possible when you study human beings.
It is a journey from anecdotal, isolated observation to robust, predictive, explanatory frameworks.
Which is the dream, right?
Absolutely. Dr. TUMI has essentially provided us with the architectural schematics for truth in the social sciences.
The schematics for truth, I love that.
Well, to build a skyscraper, you have to know exactly what your foundational materials are made of.
So let's start pouring that foundation. The text begins with what it calls the atom of research, the variable.
The variable, yes.
Everything in the social world begins right here. Now, I remember high school science. A variable is just something that changes.
Right. That's the basic definition we all learn.
But the definition provided in this scholarly material is intensely specific. It defines a variable as any component capable of changing in amount, direction, or significance.
Those three dimensions are the absolute anchor for empirical measurement.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, a component must have the capacity to fluctuate. If it is static, if it never moves, it is a constant. And constants do not explain behavioral shifts.
Right, because they don't change.
Exactly. But let's look at how Dr. TUMI breaks down those three dimensions, because they dictate how you build your tools of measurement.
Go ahead.
First, you have amount. This is your quantitative shift. Age, income level, the number of hours an employee spends in meetings. It increases or decreases numerically.
That one is easy enough to grasp. It is the math.
Right. But then you have direction. This is about the relational shift.
Relational shift, meaning how it relates to something else.
Exactly. Does an increase in one thing inherently lead to a decrease in another? For example, as a city's investment in after-school programs goes up, does the rate of juvenile vandalism go down?
Oh,
That is a directional change. It is tracking the trajectory of the relationship.
Okay, amount and direction make sense. But the third one, significance, feels a lot more abstract to me. How does a variable change in significance?
That's a great question. Significance speaks to the statistical weight or the deep contextual meaning of the change within a specific environment.
Contextual meaning. Can you give me an example?
Sure. Let's say you are looking at a national economy and unemployment drops by 0.5%.
Okay.
Mathematically, in amount, that is a tiny fraction. It's almost nothing.
Right, just 0.5%.
But structurally, in its economic significance, that fraction might represent hundreds of thousands of people re-entering the workforce.
Oh, wow.
Right. It generates billions in consumer spending, and it alters the political landscape of an upcoming election.
So the amount is small, but the significance is massive.
Precisely. A proper variable must be defined by its capacity to fluctuate across these dimensions, and the researcher must declare exactly which dimension they are measuring.
I want to use an analogy here because thinking of the variable as an atom is so helpful.
It's a great way to visualize it.
Imagine you were in a chemistry lab.
Yeah.
And you are trying to synthesize water. You need hydrogen and you need oxygen.
Basic chemistry.
Right. It doesn't matter if you have a multi-million-dollar laboratory, the best equipment on Earth, and a team of Nobel laureates.
No, it doesn't.
If you misidentify your foundational atom, if you grab a canister of helium because you vaguely thought it was oxygen, the water molecule you were trying to build simply will not exist.
It's physically impossible.
Your entire experiment is doomed before you even mix the chemicals.
And that analogy brings us to one of the most critical warnings in the professor's methodology.
Okay, what's the warning?
If you fail to meticulously define that atomic unit, you trigger what is known as a cascading failure.
A cascading failure? Honestly, it sounds like something out of a disaster movie about a nuclear reactor.
Well, in the realm of graduate research or public policy, it is a disaster.
Is it really that bad?
Absolutely. A poorly defined variable at the very foundation of your study is a terminal flaw.
Wow. A terminal flaw.
Let's walk through how this happens in the real world. Let's say a government wants to study poverty to allocate $1 billion in housing assistance.
Okay, a huge policy initiative.
Right. But what is poverty? Is it an absolute mathematical threshold, meaning anyone making under $20,000 a year?
Okay.
Or is it relative, meaning anyone in the bottom 20th percentile of their specific zip code? Is it defined by caloric intake? Is it defined by access to credit?
Oh, I see. There are a dozen ways to define it.
Exactly. If the researcher doesn't operationalize that variable, if they don't say poverty is defined exactly as X, changing in amount and significance under Y conditions, they're basically just grabbing the helium.
Because no one knows what atom they are actually using.
Yes. And the data they collect becomes entirely uninterpretable.
Because the foundation is flawed.
Right. If the atomic unit lacks a clear operationalized definition, the researcher will gather thousands of surveys, run complex statistical software, and present a massive report.
It's all useless.
Structurally compromised. No one can reproduce the study because no other scientist knows what was actually measured.
And the real-world consequence is that the policy built on that report will fail, the $1 billion will be misallocated, and the researchers will have no idea why.
Exactly. They won't even know where the mistake was made.
Oh, wait, let me jump in here. Because I can hear a graduate student or frustrated analyst listening to this and saying, look, human behavior is incredibly messy.
Oh, it is. Very messy.
You can't put human suffering or human motivation into a perfectly sealed box.
Yeah.
So is the architecture really that fragile?
It is a common defense.
I mean, can one's slightly vague definition truly destroy an entire graduate-level thesis? Or collapse a massive government study? Can't the sheer volume of data make up for a slightly fuzzy definition?
No. And Dr. TUMI's framework definitively affirms that, yes, the architecture is absolutely that fragile.
So volume doesn't save you.
Actually, volume amplifies the error. You cannot build a stable scientific architecture on a crumbling foundation.
Wow. Clarity is the absolute precursor to validity.
It has to be. Think about the gravity of what a doctoral thesis or a major policy paper attempts to do. You are trying to make a definitive claim about the mechanics of society.
Right.
If your foundational variable is worker productivity, but you haven't strictly defined whether productivity means hours logged sitting at a desk or actual revenue generated for the company, any subsequent analysis is entirely meaningless.
Because the person reading the study might define productivity differently than the person who wrote it.
Exactly.
And the people answering the survey might define it differently than both of them.
Precisely. You might find a statistical correlation, but it is a complete illusion. The collapse happens because the methodology loses its empirical credibility.
Just a house of cards.
Right. Dr. TUMI's methodology insists that the variable must be an unshakable anchor. It must be empirically measured.
So if you get the variable wrong, you aren't even doing science yet.
No, you are just writing down your own assumptions disguised as data.
That is a harsh reality check. Do not move an inch forward until your variable is locked in, operationalized, and ready to be measured.
Exactly. Lock down the atom.
Okay, so we have defined our atoms. We have avoided the cascading failure at the ground floor. But atoms sitting alone in a void don't explain the complexity of the universe.
They don't.
To understand the social world, we have to look at how these atoms bond together.
Which guides us to the next rung on the ladder of complexity.
We're moving up.
Yes.
Yeah.
We move from the isolated atomic level to relational microstructures. And here, the source text makes a very strict, critical distinction between two terms that people in the social sciences casually and incorrectly use interchangeably all the time.
What are they?
The construct and the concept.
Oh, I am 100% guilty of using those interchangeably.
Yeah.
I really am. I'll say, I have a concept for a study, or I'm building a theoretical construct.
And most people do it. It all sounds like the same academic jargon.
But Dr. TUMI pulls them apart very deliberately, doesn't he?
Very deliberately.
Let's look at the construct first. The text defines a construct as a focused dyadic relation. Dyadic meaning exactly two.
Exactly two variables, variable A and variable B. No more, no less. And crucially, it is applied to a specific, highly limited case.
Okay, so how does that look in practice? Give me a scenario where a researcher is purposefully building a construct.
All right, let's use the world of corporate management. Variable A is remote work frequency, measured strictly in the number of days an employee works from home per week.
Got it.
Variable B is employee burnout, measured strictly by the score on a specific standardized psychological survey.
Okay, so two perfectly defined atoms.
Exactly. Now, if a researcher looks exclusively at how variable A affects variable B within one single mid-sized accounting firm in Chicago, during the month of October, they have built a construct.
Wow, that is incredibly focused.
hmm
It is like putting a microscope over one single slide and refusing to look at anything else in the laboratory.
It is highly controlled isolation. But because it is so hyper-focused on that one accounting firm, during that 1 month, its generalizability is virtually zero.
Right. You can't take those findings and apply them everywhere.
No, you cannot take the findings of that construct and confidently tell a tech startup in Tokyo or a manufacturing plant in Germany that working from home causes or cures burnout. The environment is too limited.
Which raises a really obvious question for me. If a construct is so limited, if it has basically no generalizability, why even bother doing it?
It's a fair question.
I mean, if I am a policymaker, I don't care about one accounting firm in Chicago. I need to know how to structure labor laws for an entire country. Why not just jump straight to studying everyone everywhere?
Because you need proof of concept for your tools. A construct offers immense strategic value because it allows for a deep dive into a single instance to verify that your variables are actually interacting.
Oh, so it's a testing ground.
It is the testing ground. If you try to map the whole world immediately and your measurement tool for burnout is flawed, you've wasted years of research and millions of dollars.
You trigger that cascading failure on a global scale.
Exactly. The construct allows a researcher to say, okay, in this tiny controlled bubble, variable A and variable B definitely affect each other. My instruments work. My observation is valid.
You have the pilot episode of your research program.
That's a perfect way to phrase it. The pilot episode.
You shoot one episode to see if the characters have chemistry before you commit to a 10-season run.
Exactly. You prove the dynamic works.
But eventually, you do have to shoot the rest of the series.
Yeah.
And that is where we step out of the single laboratory and into the wider world. That is where we move from the construct to the concept.
And this transition is massive. In a concept, according to Professor Dr. Khaled TUMI's framework, we involve more than two variables, and we apply them to multiple cases across different environments.
What drives a researcher to make that leap? It seems like you are trading the safety of a controlled environment for a lot of logistical nightmares.
Well, you are trading safety for explanatory power.
Explanatory power.
Yes, it is about strategic ambition. A construct proves a relationship exists. A concept proves a relationship matters on a societal scale.
So sticking with our remote work example, how does that localized Chicago construct evolve into a concept?
To elevate it to a concept, we break out of the dyadic relation. We don't just look at remote work frequency and burnout. We add more variables.
Like what?
We add variable C, management communication style, measured by frequency of check-ins. We add variable D, employee commute time, measured in daily minutes.
Okay, so the system's getting more complex.
And most importantly, we stop looking at just one accounting firm. We apply these four variables to multiple cases: tech companies in California, public hospitals in London, and retail management networks in Sydney.
So you're actively looking for the boundaries of the pattern.
Yeah.
You're trying to see where the relationship holds up and where it breaks down.
Exactly. You are seeking high generalizability. If you find that remote work reduces burnout in the Chicago accounting firm, but actually increases burnout in the London hospital because of the difference in management communication style, you have discovered a vastly more profound truth.
Wow. Yeah.
You are defining a broad social phenomenon, not just a localized quirk.
Let's pause here and connect this directly to you, the listener. If you are sitting down with your dissertation advisor tomorrow, or if you are leading a research and development team, you have to ask yourself a fundamental question about your ambition.
A very critical question.
Are you just trying to observe one gear turning another gear inside one specific clock, which is a construct? Or are you trying to understand the principles of timekeeping across all mechanical devices entirely, which is a concept?
And Dr. Tumi's vision strongly pushes researchers to ascend this ladder toward that greater theoretical ambition.
To not just stop at the construct.
Right. A construct is a safe place to hide. It is easy to defend in a thesis review because it is so small. But a concept pushes the boundaries of human knowledge. It amplifies the impact of the work.
It makes it useful.
Exactly. When high-ranking government officials are reviewing empirical data, they do not need constructs. They need concepts. They need to know how policy levers will affect multiple interacting variables across vast, diverse populations.
I really appreciate how the architecture is building layer by layer. We went from the foundational variable to the dyadic construct, and now we have this multivariable, highly generalizable concept.
Yes, the progression is very clear.
But here's the thing. Even if I have a fantastic concept, even if I have mountains of data showing how remote work, burnout, commute times, and management styles interact across 10 different countries, I still just have a giant list of relationships.
You do.
I don't actually have a cohesive picture of how the whole system operates, do I?
No, you don't. You have all the pieces of a highly complex puzzle, and you've proven that the pieces fit together, but you don't have the picture on the box to show you what you're actually building.
Oh, that's frustrating.
It is. And this is a major, often misunderstood transition point in Dr. Tumi's methodology. We are now moving into systemic synthesis.
Systemic synthesis. Okay.
We have to transition from observing isolated groups of relationships to designing complete architectural systems.
Which brings us to the model framework and the theory, the map versus the engine.
Yes.
This is, without a doubt, my favorite metaphor from the source material. Let's unpack the model framework first.
Go for it.
The text explicitly refers to the model as a map. It provides the structural organization and layout of variables across wide ranges of cases. It tells you exactly what is there and where it is located relative to everything else.
Think about looking at a highly detailed physical map of a major metropolis.
Okay, like a city map.
Right. The map shows you where the heavy industrial zones are, where the dense residential neighborhoods are, where the commercial hubs sit, and it shows you the network of highways that connect them all.
It lays everything out.
A model framework in the social sciences does exactly that for your research. It organizes the landscape of your data. It says, over here is the demographic data, over here is the economic data, and here are the correlation pathways that link them.
But if I am standing in the middle of that city and traffic is completely gridlocked on Main Street at 5:00 p.m., the map doesn't tell me why the traffic is backed up.
No, it doesn't.
The map just confirms that Main Street exists and that cars drive on it.
That is the perfect distinction. A model tells you what is there, but it does not tell you why it moves.
It lacks the dynamic part.
Right. It lacks dynamic causal explanation. It shows you correlation that high-density residential zones correlate with heavy highway usage, but it doesn't give you the mechanics of the movement.
So how do we get the mechanics?
To get the why and the how, you have to transition from the map to the engine. You have to ascend to the level of theory.
And the text doesn't mince words here. It calls theory the absolute gold standard of social science.
The pinnacle.
But this is where I got a little tripped up in the reading, and I want you to clarify this. The text describes theory as a system of equations.
Yes, a system of equations.
When I read that, my brain immediately went to high school algebra. Why use the term system of equations for social science? Isn't that a hard math concept? Are we suddenly trying to turn sociology into calculus?
It is borrowed from mathematics, yes, but Dr. Toomey is using it here metaphorically to signify a profound level of interdependent logic.
Interdependent logic. Okay.
In algebra, in a system of equations, the variables are locked together by absolute rules. If you change the value of x, it automatically forces a change in the value of y, which cascades into changing the value of z. They are inextricably linked.
Ah, it's about the ripple effect. It's about how the gears catch each other.
Exactly. In a robust social science theory, variables are interdependent in that exact same mechanistic way. It is not just a map, it is an engine with moving parts. A change in one variable ripples through the entire network.
Can you give me a real-world example of this engine in action?
Let's look at a massive policy example. Suppose a government implements a universal basic income.
Okay, very topical.
A model framework just maps where that money is distributed. But a theoretical engine maps the causal mechanism.
Ripple effects.
Right. It predicts that an increase in baseline income alters the variable of household stress, which changes the variable of early childhood cognitive development, which 20 years later alters the variable of adult criminality, which shifts the variable of localized property values.
Wow. So a theory goes far beyond mere correlation. It is not just saying, look, A and B seem to happen at the same time. Is that interesting?
No, not at all.
Theory is planting a flag and saying, A actively causes B through this specific mechanism C, but only under condition D.
That is the explanatory depth that elevates theory to the gold standard. It provides the causal narrative. It possesses probabilistic rigor and systemic flexibility.
It's a forecasting tool.
It allows a researcher to actually forecast outcomes within a massively complex system. If you are advising a head of state on economic policy, you don't just hand them a map and say, here's where the economy is, good luck.
Right, that wouldn't be very helpful.
You hand them the engine and say, If you pull this specific legislative lever, here is the interdependent system of equations that explains exactly how the population will respond.
That is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
The ladder of complexity is really taking shape now. We went from the variable, the single atom, to the construct, to the concept, to the structural model, and finally to the theoretical engine.
The journey is complete.
It feels like we have built a towering skyscraper of knowledge.
We have, and we have done it by following a rigorous methodological sequence that prevents structural collapse at every single level.
But this is where the deep dive gets intensely philosophical. Because if theory is so incredibly powerful, if this engine is so predictive and so rigorously mapped out, well, why stop there?
You are looking for the absolute summit. You are asking why there isn't another rung on the ladder.
Exactly. Because in the physical sciences, they don't stop at the theory of gravity. They look for the law of gravity,
Right.
a universal, unbreakable rule of the cosmos. So why do social scientists stop at theory? Why don't we aim for absolute, immutable laws of human behavior?
Because in our field, an absolute universal law is a mirage. It is an epistemological phantom.
It's a phantom.
The source text is very explicit and very sober about this limitation. We operate under what is known as the social science ceiling.
The social science ceiling. Okay.
In the physical sciences, a law applies to 100% of cases, without exception. If you hold an apple out the window and let go, it falls.
Every single time.
It falls every single time in every country, in every century, regardless of whether the apple wants to fall or not.
But humans aren't apples.
Precisely. A universal standard applying to all cases is considered rare to the point of being non-existent in studying human society.
Which makes sense when you think about it.
And this limitation is grounded in the most fundamental axiom of the entire field, an axiom championed in Professor Dr. Khaled TUMI's work.
What is the axiom?
Everything is a variable.
Everything is a variable. Let that sink in for a moment. If you are a researcher looking for absolute certainty, that is a terrifying thought. The ground is always moving under your feet.
It is. The architecture is built on shifting sands, which is why the methodology must be so rigorous. Dr. TUMI deconstructs this impossible pursuit of absolute law by outlining 3 specific, insurmountable reasons why universal laws fail in social science.
Okay, let's go through them.
The first reason is temporal instability.
Meaning time itself destroys the law.
Profoundly. Human behavior evolves. The parameters of society change. A brilliantly constructed sociological rule that perfectly explained consumer behavior or voting patterns or family dynamics in the 1990s might be completely obsolete today.
Right, because of technology.
The rise of the internet, the ubiquity of smartphones, global pandemics, shifts in macroeconomic power, all of these introduce massive systemic temporal shifts.
You just can't lock it down forever.
You cannot have a 100% universal law if the very universe you are studying fundamentally reinvents its own rules every 20 years.
Okay, temporal instability makes perfect sense. The rules of the 19th century don't govern the 21st century. What is the second reason?
Context dependency. Social structures are not universal across space, just as they aren't universal across time. They are deeply shaped by highly variable culture, geography, and historical trauma. A theory about democratic participation in a Western industrialized nation that has had 200 years of stable, peaceful elections will not apply 100% of the time to a newly formed nation recovering from a brutal civil war in a completely different hemisphere.
The context is completely different.
The context dictates the structure. Therefore, a universal standard that ignores geography and culture is structurally impossible.
You can't just copy and paste a societal rule across the globe and expect the math to hold up.
Exactly. But the third reason is perhaps the most profound, and it is what separates the social sciences from every other scientific discipline.
I am intrigued.
It is what Dr. TUMI refers to as the volatility of agency.
Agency, meaning human free will, the power of choice.
Because the underlying components of our study, the atoms, the human beings, possess consciousness. They possess the power to simply change their minds.
Right, an atom of oxygen can't just decide to be something else.
Exactly. Because of this, our findings can never be perfectly deterministic. An apple cannot choose to defy gravity to make a political statement.
That would be something.
But a human being can choose to defy a social norm, a market trend, or an expected psychological response simply out of spite or sudden inspiration or pure irrationality.
But let me challenge this, because I know what the hard science physicists or the skeptical policymakers are thinking right now.
What are they thinking?
They hear temporal instability context dependency, and the volatility of agency, and they say, well, if everything is constantly changing and everyone has free will and there are no absolute laws, doesn't that just make social science a giant guessing game? Is it just a bunch of educated guessing disguised with fancy academic jargon?
That is the ultimate skeptical challenge, and it is the exact skepticism that Dr. TUMI's methodology systematically dismantles.
How does he dismantle it?
To answer that, we have to understand the critical difference between deterministic science and probabilistic science.
Okay, break that down for me. Deterministic versus probabilistic. Because that sounds like the core defense of the entire discipline.
It is. Deterministic science says, if A happens, B will happen 100% of the time, no matter what.
Like gravity.
That is the realm of absolute laws. Probabilistic science says, if A happens, B has an 85% probability of happening under X cultural conditions because of Y causal mechanisms.
Ah, so it embraces the variables.
The volatility of human agency does not turn social science into guesswork. On the contrary, it transforms it into an incredibly sophisticated discipline of probability.
So it's about predicting the likelihood, mapping the deep systemic patterns, without pretending you can control every individual human outlier.
Precisely. Recognizing the social science ceiling, accepting that we cannot achieve 100% absolute laws, is not a weakness.
That's actually a strength.
It is not a failure of our discipline to be real science. It is a highly sophisticated, deeply honest reflection of the human condition.
It takes more work, honestly.
It requires a level of methodological rigor that is arguably much more complex than dealing with static objects in a vacuum. You are trying to map the engine of a car while the engine is actively thinking, feeling, and deciding to change directions.
That is such a powerful reframing of the field. We aren't failing to find the law of sociology. We are succeeding at mapping the most staggeringly complex, unpredictable system in the known universe. Human society.
And that is exactly why mastering the theory level is the ultimate goal. You build interdependent networks that account for the vast majority of cases, providing massive predictive power to policymakers, while intellectually respecting the fact that humans are not machines.
So let's bring this down to earth. What does this all mean for you, the listener?
The practical application.
Right. We have climbed the entire ladder. We started at the variable, we reached the theoretical engine, and we looked up and touched the social science ceiling. Let's get down to practical application. How does someone actually apply this architectural sequence in their daily work?
Well, the source material distills this entire philosophical journey into an actionable blueprint. It lays out 3 pillars of strategic excellence based on the learner's mission.
Okay, let's hear them.
If you are writing a thesis, designing a clinical study, or reviewing policy data right now, this is your mandatory checklist.
Pillar 1, operationalize with precision.
This takes us right back to the atom. Prevent that cascading failure before it begins. You must define your variables with strict empirical indicators.
No vague definitions.
None. If you claim you are studying community resilience, you cannot leave that open to artistic interpretation.
Because then everyone measures it differently.
Exactly. You must state, community resilience is defined here exclusively by the speed of economic recovery post-natural disaster, measured in months, alongside the retention rate of local businesses.
Wow, that is incredibly specific.
Lock it down so tightly, so empirically, that a researcher on the other side of the planet could reproduce your exact measurement.
No vague atoms. Helium
Yeah.
does not oxygen. Got it. Pillar 2, test boundaries.
This is the necessary push from the construct to the concept. Don't get stuck doing safe, highly localized research that only applies to one specific case.
Don't stay in the Chicago accounting firm forever.
Right. It might get you a degree, but it won't change the field. Push yourself. Test your concepts across diverse populations. If you find a behavioral pattern in one city, test it in another.
Find out where it breaks.
Find the boundaries of where your idea works and, more importantly, where it breaks down. That is how you find high generalizability. That is how you make your work matter on a national or global scale.
Step out of the single lab and into the messy world. And finally, pillar 3, map causal mechanisms.
Stop chasing mere correlations. It is never enough to simply say, ice cream sales and violent crime both go up in the summer.
Right, the classic correlation example.
That is a correlation. It doesn't mean eating ice cream causes people to commit crimes. They are both linked to the hidden variable of rising temperatures.
So you have to find the engine.
You must build the theoretical engine. You must do the exhausting, rigorous work of finding out the why and the how. What is the interdependent system of equations actually driving these variables?
And when you achieve that, when you finally build that engine, you have reached the pinnacle. As the text makes abundantly clear, mastering the theory level is not a consolation prize for lacking universal laws.
Definitely not.
It is the absolute ceiling of scientific excellence. It is how you provide predictive, actionable, life-saving insights for our complex world.
It is the ultimate service a researcher can provide to society.
And none of this incredible clarity, this architectural blueprint that saves researchers from drowning in the muddy waters, none of this happens by accident.
No, it doesn't.
We have spent this entire deep dive navigating this masterful framework, but we need to talk about the architect himself.
Indeed. This level of epistemological depth doesn't simply materialize out of the academic ether. It is the result of decades of meticulous scholarship, rigorous teaching, and profound intellectual labor.
We want to dedicate this segment to celebrating the author of this unique and distinguished scholarly material, Professor Dr. Khaled Abdulqader Mansour TUMI.
It is essential to recognize his monumental role in enriching research methodology. Everything we've discussed today, the sequential ladder from atomic variables to theoretical engines, the dire warnings against cascading failures, the sophisticated navigation of the social science ceiling.
It's all his vision.
This is his penetrating vision. It is his absolute command of the language of research that prevents structural collapse in graduate studies globally.
It really acts as a lifeline. When I think about how many graduate students, or even seasoned academic professionals, get completely lost and overwhelmed by the sheer chaos of human behavioral data,
It happens all the time.
Dr. TUMI provides the compass, the map, and the engine. He establishes a solid, unshakable foundation for empirical measurement that cuts through the noise.
His work embodies a rich, vital, scholarly reservoir. It isn't just theory for theory's sake. It is a practical, rigorous demand for excellence in how we observe the world.
And his impact is far-reaching.
Very much so. The text highlights how his academic standing has completely transcended local boundaries.
His name really is a mark of distinction. It is invoked in high-level academic forums, regionally and internationally.
A standard bearer, really.
When a researcher or a government official anchors their methodology in the framework of Dr. TUMI, they are signaling a commitment to a standard of research that is relentless, honest, and profoundly deep.
And what I find incredibly beautiful in the closing of the source material is the geographical anchor of this monumental work.
Yes, tell us about that.
Professor Dr. Khaled TUMI continues his scholarly contributions, shaping the minds of the next generation of researchers from the heart of the ancient city of Tripoli in the state of Libya.
That is a striking and powerful detail. It brings us to a profound philosophical takeaway embedded in the text.
Which is?
Sound knowledge, true scientific clarity, is confined by no place.
It truly isn't. An enlightened thought, a rigorous methodological framework of this magnitude, can radiate from any corner of the world to benefit the entire global nation and the international scholarly community.
It transcends borders.
From Tripoli, this framework reaches graduate students agonizing over their theses in New York, government officials drafting policy in London, and sociologists mapping behavior in Tokyo. It is a testament to the universal, unifying power of precise, dedicated scholarship.
It is a legacy of clarity. By giving us the precise language to describe our complex social world, Dr. TUMI has given us the actual tools to understand it.
And ultimately to improve it, because
Yeah.
you cannot fix a social system that you cannot accurately measure and map.
Okay, let's take a collective breath and look back at the monumental climb we just made.
It was quite a climb.
We started in the mud, staring at the broken X-ray machine of human behavior. But we found the ladder. We started with the atomic variable, ensuring it changes in amount, direction, or significance, locking it down to prevent a cascading failure.
We bonded those perfectly defined atoms into specific, localized constructs to test our tools, and then expanded our strategic ambition to highly generalizable concepts.
We mapped the sprawling landscape with structural model frameworks,
The maps.
and then we built the gold standard, the theoretical engine, an interdependent system of equations mapping the deep causal mechanisms of why we do what we do.
All while acknowledging and respecting the social science ceiling?
The impossibility of absolute laws.
Right. We embraced the probabilistic, nuanced nature of our field,
Yeah.
understanding that it is shaped by temporal instability, context dependency, and the beautiful, chaotic volatility of human agency.
A truly masterful architectural vision provided by Professor Dr. Khaled Toumi. But as you know, if you listen to this show, we don't want to just leave you with a summary of what the text says.
No, we need to push it a little further.
We want to leave you with something to chew on, something that pushes the boundaries of this framework into the uncharted territory of the future.
And this raises a fascinating and slightly unnerving question, something that builds directly on the foundation we just laid.
Let's hear it.
We talked extensively about the volatility of human agency and temporal instability as the fundamental reasons why absolute 100% laws are impossible in social science today.
Right. Humans are unpredictable, we have free will, and our societies are constantly shifting.
But look at the technological world we are building right now. Look at the explosion of artificial intelligence, deep machine learning, and predictive algorithms in our daily lives.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see where you're going.
Algorithms now predict what consumer goods we will buy, who we will date, what media will keep us engaged, and even how we will vote, with frightening, unprecedented accuracy. They are processing human variables at a scale previously unimaginable.
So they're processing the volatility.
Exactly. So the provocative thought for you to ponder is this. How might this technological revolution fundamentally alter the rules of the ladder? Will artificial intelligence and quantum computing eventually stabilize and predict human behavior so perfectly that it actually allows us to shatter the social science ceiling?
Wait, you mean find the absolute laws?
Could AI algorithms find the absolute deterministic laws of human behavior that we've always assumed were impossible because they can mathematically calculate the volatility of agency? Or will AI simply become another actor in the system, introducing a million new, completely unpredictable variables into our theoretical engines, making human society even more chaotic?
Does the algorithm cure the volatility of human agency, or does it weaponize it? That is an incredible, mind-bending question.
It changes everything.
Are we moving toward a future where human behavior becomes a hard science, perfectly predictable by an AI engine? If you are a graduate researcher looking for a groundbreaking thesis topic, you are very welcome.
It is the next great frontier of the ladder of complexity.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of knowledge. It has been a profound, challenging journey from the atomic level to the absolute ceiling of social science.
As you move forward in your own work, remember the methodological rigor we explored today. Keep asking why, keep seeking the deep causal mechanisms, and never settle for just drawing a map when you can build the engine.
And always, always double-check your foundational variables, because the next